What is up, guys? Welcome back to a special edition of CageChat, where I'm going to be looking over the top 5 moments, in my opinion, of the UFC in 2018. Now, of course, we are moving over to ESPN in 2019 and UFC Brooklyn's this week, so I thought we'd have a little reflection and look over the biggest events of 2018. I have picked the top 5. Let me know in the comments what your top 5 is and whether you agree with myself. Now, starting off this at number 5, it is Amanda Nunes becoming the double champ. She beat Cris Cyborg at UFC 232 to become the UFC Women's Featherweight division head of the 145-pound division, and she did it in what was a very knockout fashion, pardon the pun. Now, she has put her name in the hat to be the greatest women's fighter in the UFC of all time, and rightfully so, like beating the likes of Ronda Rousey. She beat Miesha Tate to become champion. That's where this all blew up for her, really, and of course, she's now beat Cris Cyborg. Now, she probably has one contender to face, and that is Holly Holm. Whether that is in a featherweight or bantamweight division, we will find out. But Nunes is definitely one of the greatest female fighters of all time, and definitely on the path to become the greatest, dependent on what happens within 2019. And now, moving on to number 4, it is Max Holloway. Now, Max Holloway had a very up and down year. He was meant to be fighting Brian Ortega in May, but decided because of Tony Ferguson's injury before UFC 223 that he would step up to the lightweight division to take on Khabib Nurmagomedov. Now, this did also fall through, with his weight cut being a bit too strenuous, and he was pulled from the fight due to the medical staff saying that he wasn't eligible to fight because of the medical condition he was in. Now, this did put a spanner in the works for his 145-pound fight against Brian Ortega. A couple of months after that, he again went into his weight cutting process and his body failed him again. Now, I believe it was this one where Michael Bisping did notice that he was slurring his words and wasn't acting his usual high-pitched self. Now, of course, Max Holloway is a very comical and very upbeat. You know, he's got that Hawaiian blood, he's got that persona, he's got that bravado, and he's a very funny guy to listen to. He's actually probably one of my favourite fighters in the UFC. So to see him unhealthy and see him unfit was never great, but he came back from that in November, and he very brutally dismantled Brian Ortega in a 4-round in the end. What was an absolute war. It was almost one-sided when we got to the end of the 4th round, hence why the doctors had to call it off, with Brian Ortega's eye closing up, and he looked like a beaten man. Now, it was his first title challenge, and it was an experience I'd imagine he's learnt from very much so. But Max Holloway, again, another one for the greatest of all time, but he's definitely the greatest featherweight in my opinion. He's beat Aldo twice, who was the greatest at that time. Now, the only really sort of exclamation mark on his career is Conor McGregor. Now, it does sort of suggest to you how good is Conor McGregor, pardon to quote Chael Sonnen there. And, you know, he lost to Conor McGregor, who went on to become featherweight and lightweight champions of the world. But Max Holloway was very young then. He was only 21, and he's had an amazing run of form. He's not lost a fight since that, and of course become champion and kept that championship with him. Now, there's a lot of talk of him moving up to the lightweight division, as Conor McGregor did, and I'd like to see that personally. I'd like to see him fight Conor McGregor again, potentially Dustin Poirier, maybe Khabib, or Tony Ferguson, but I believe those two need to fight off against each other first. But I do like the idea of Holloway keeping at 145, even though the weight cut is strenuous on him, and it's up to him if he wants to keep that title and really cement himself within the featherweight division and the featherweight's history. Then he needs to stay at that for at least 2 more fights, get 2 more wins under his belt, then go off to the lightweight division if that's what he's so choosing. Now, moving on to 3rd place is Daniel Cormier, becoming double champ. Probably the nicest man in the UFC. He was UFC's 205 champion at light heavyweight, and in January he did fight Volkan Ozdemir for the championship and dismantled him with his wrestling ability. Now, also on that card, and that's a big noticeable event, was of course Stipe Miocic versus Francis Ngannou. Now, Stipe did beat Francis Ngannou over the 5 rounds with his fantastic wrestling ability again, and a few months later, I believe it was in June, at UFC 226, is where Daniel Cormier moved up to heavyweight, where previously he was undefeated in this, but of course got his championship and his legacy in the 205-pound division. But yes, he did come in about 250, I think it was 255 pounds, and he absolutely sparked Miocic out clean. Now, Miocic is arguably one of the greatest heavyweights. He's defended it the most. He's got the record unless Daniel Cormier could match that within another fight, of course. Daniel Cormier did have 3 fights this year. He fought Derek Lewis in November on UFC 230, and that was really an easy fight for him as well. He hasn't really been challenged and keeps his undefeated rank and record at the UFC heavyweight. Now, what comes up for Daniel Cormier is 2 potential monsters. We've got Brock Lesnar, rumoured to be returning and getting that money fight with Daniel Cormier. The money fight for, of course, Daniel Cormier, because Brock Lesnar will bring in the big numbers. But there is also now the rumours of Jon Jones moving up to heavyweight and facing him for the 3rd time. Now, personally, I'm not a big fan of seeing it for the 3rd time. It's happened twice already. Jon Jones has beat him twice, and I don't yet want to see a Jon Jones Daniel Cormier 3, especially not even at heavyweight. And I think in that division, Daniel Cormier could be persuaded to be the favourite, but it's not a fight. I want to see the Lesnar fight first, especially if Daniel Cormier does only have 2 fights left in him before he retires. So yes, that does take my 3rd position. Daniel Cormier, nicest guy in MMA, but also an absolute monster. Now moving from 3rd position to 2nd position, and someone who's regularly got the number 1 spot, or a spot above Daniel Cormier, it is Jon Jones. Jon Jones did make his return in December at UFC 232, become the light heavyweight champion yet again, after beating Gustafsson for the 2nd time, after what was quite a controversial lead up to the fight. It was very packed with him testing hot, of course, on the side of rules. Nevada not accepting the fight in their state, and the whole fight happened to be moved to California. And of course, before that, he did have the whole, did he snitch to USADA to get an earlier suspension or a less of a suspension? It was UFC 214 that he fought at against Daniel Cormier, and of course tested positive shortly after that and had a 16 to 18 month suspension, which he did pass in October, but there was a lot of queries as to why or how he got a lesser suspension. But yes, Jon Jones coming back is always big news, and he has a 2019 that could be very busy for him. 2 or 3 fights, I'd imagine, which is only good for the UFC's number. Now, of course, at number 1, there's only one moment and one fight that was going to be at this position, and it is UFC 229, Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Conor McGregor, the return of the Irish King. Would he come back to his home and defeat the undefeated in Khabib Nurmagomedov? Now, this had a 6-month build-up with, of course, the bus incident with the dolly that Conor McGregor threw through the bus at UFC 223 in New York, causing absolute havoc. He's still got charges from Michael Chiesa. Rose Namajunas hasn't fought since that card because of the things that she's experienced with what happened on the bus, and it did bring an incredible fight, but the most unbearable, or unbearable is the wrong word to use, the tension in that fight, let's say, was unfathomable, and it was really one for the ages. It was probably the biggest fight of the year. Well, it was most definitely the biggest fight of the year. I remember the press conference very well. I've actually watched it a few times since. Conor McGregor, and how he antagonised Khabib, and that really did come to show at the end of UFC 229 when, of course, Khabib did jump the cage after getting a 4th round victory. Let's not forget, and let's not forget he did get a 4th round victory before absolutely unleashing havoc inside Nevada, inside the T-Mobile Arena. Since then, they've both been under the Athletic Commission in Nevada and have yet been decided what to do. There was purses being held, but I do believe they both have their purses now. It's just whether they go up to the Athletic Commission and what bans and what procedures are next, if any at all. It might be because it's Khabib and Conor McGregor. You could also be seeing it being slipped under the carpet, as they are UFC's 2 biggest stars at the moment, and both need to be fighting soon, otherwise they will hold up the division. So yes, that is my top 5 moments for 2018. Let me know yours in the comments below. Be sure to check out the social medias, CageChat YT, in the description below. Comment, subscribe as I said, and go Sting 'em.